Night pressed in on Jake Callahan like a cold fist. The wind moaning through skeletal branches and carrying snowflakes that flickered in his headlights like restless spirits. He gripped the steering wheel, knuckles pale beneath his gloves. But his thoughts drifted elsewhere, that to a promise he'd broken. Max, his battle-tested canine partner and closest friend, had slipped from life's grasp too soon. Jake still heard the tremble in Max's whimper. Felt the wet warmth of those brown eyes as they dimmed in his arms. He'd vowed, "You protected me, now I'll bring you home." But tonight, 3 months later, guilt and grief sat heavy in his chest as he drove through the whiteout. Would he ever outrun that pain? A lone shape materialized at the edge of the woods, a dark silhouette against a sea of white. Jake eased off the gas, heart hammering. Snow had buried most of it, but not enough to hide the rigid posture of the figure tied to a tree. He blinked, sure it was a trick of his grief-stricken mind. But no, there stood a dog, frozen in place, its fur caked in ice and driver's tears of winter dust. In an instant, Jake's breath went cold. It looked just like Max. He slammed the truck door open. The wind sliced his face like shards of glass, but he didn't care. Coaching himself through the haze of shock, he approached on legs numb with adrenaline. The dog's ribs poked through its sodden coat, each breath a labor. Jake crouched, trained instincts slicing through horror. A long scar marred its hind leg, a battered canine collar hung loose, and a discreet tattoo etched into its ear whispered, "Military service." Rage and pity swirled in his gut. Someone had abandoned this warrior to the elements. How could they? Jake's hands trembled as he knelt beside the creature. The rope was cinched like a death sentence, its fibers rubbed raw against the dog's flesh. Cried blood crusted black around the wound. He pressed his palm to the dog's side. Ice met fire, and a faint shudder told him life still pulsed there. Drawing his combat knife, he jammed the tip into the frozen knot. The steel slipped under his gloved fingers, slicing shallowly into his skin. Pain was nothing. He couldn't bear another loss. Not this time. With a grunt, he pried at the hardened fibers, each twist threatening to snap his resolve. A soft whimper broke the night. Raw and fragile. A sound that made Jake's throat close. He whispered, "Hold on, warrior." Then, with one final heave and a splintering snap, the rope gave way. The dog collapsed, a ragdoll of frost and fury. Jake caught him, cradling a bundle of bones beneath wet fur. No time to waste. He sprinted back to the truck, snow lashing at his face, lungs burning. He laid the dog on the passenger seat and punched the heater to high. The vents coughed feeble warmth. Jake peeled off his gloves and pressed his palms against the dog's chest. Sharing the heat, he fought so hard to reclaim himself. Memories of Max's last breath roared through him. "This dog can't die on my watch." His voice dropped to a hoarse whisper. "You fight, you hear me?" The engine roared to life. Tires shrieked on ice, and the world blurred. Only one destination mattered. At the vet clinic, the emergency sign flickered like a warning beacon. Jake flung open the door, his arms a cradle of urgency. "Please, help him," he shouted. Dr. Olivia Carter and her assistant raced out, eyes widening at the sight of the frail creature in his arms. Inside, chaos bloomed into precision. A tech snipped the last rope fibers away, revealing bruised skin beneath crusted blood. Another draped warming blankets over the dog's shivering frame. Dr. Carter pressed her stethoscope to the animal's chest. Jake's heart sank at the faint, erratic beat. Too weak. Too slow. The monitor's beeps echoed like thunder in Jake's mind, each one threatening to cease. Then a tech called out, "Microchip." There was a flicker of hope. Dr. Carter's fingers flew across her keyboard. "Retired K9, Westford Police Department." Jake's blood ran cold. How many days had this dog suffered alone? He demanded, voice coiled with steel. "Any missing report?" Dr. Carter held the line, then shook her head. "No one's looking for him." Seconds later, a gruff voice answered. "Westford PD." Dr. Carter's professional tone cracked. "We have your decommissioned K9 barely alive." The man's response was a death knell. "We decommissioned him. Injury made him useless." Jake ripped the phone free. "He's a soldier. You left him to die." His fist pounded the counter, knuckles whiter than the snow. The man shrugged. "Not our problem." Anguish and fury burned in Jake's throat. Dr. Carter took back the phone. "We'll care for him," she said softly, cutting the call. Jake's gaze never wavered from the dog's beaten form. "You're not trash," he murmured. The quiet room held only the dog's shallow breaths and Jake's ragged inhalations. "Do you want him?" Dr. Carter asked, studying Jake's battered face. The question hung in the sterile air. Jake didn't hesitate. "I am his home." Moments later, as if summoned by the promise, the dog stirred. A feeble twitch of its tail, an almost imperceptible yes. Relief shattered Jake's control. Carter allowed herself a small smile. He's responding. That's a very good sign. Weeks passed. The winter sun turned gentle, melting the last icicles from rustic porch. Jake stood with a steaming mug in hand, breath curling in the air, watching the once doomed dog, now named Shadow, bound across the yard. His coat had filled out, ribs no longer visible beneath a glossy silver-grey pelt. Shadow's chest rose and fell with strong, easy breaths. "Come here, boy," Jake called. Shadow skidded to a halt, leapt up, paws pressing against Jake's chest. The same gesture Max once shared. For a heartbeat, the world stilled. Jake felt a familiar warmth brush his cheek, as if Max's spirit hovered in the breeze, offering approval. Jake knelt, wrapping an arm around Shadow's neck. "We're home now, Shadow. This time, we stay together." And somewhere beyond the frost-tipped trees, under a sky washed pink by dawn, two warriors stood guard, one by Jake's side, the other in his heart, both at last safe, both at last home. Jake carried Shadow inside the small farmhouse, where pale morning light streamed through frost-lined windows, glinting off chipped paint and worn floorboards. The air smelled of wood smoke and stale coffee. But as he set Shadow gently on a thick woolen blanket by the stove, that sharp bite of winter gave way to a comforting warmth. He knelt beside him, brushing the dog's glossy coat, fingertip by fingertip, marveling at how full and healthy each strand had grown. Shadow's ears flicked, and the soft tapping of his tail against the blanket sounded like a slow drumbeat of life returning. Jake closed his eyes, letting the rhythmic pulse flatten the jagged edges of his fear. "This is real," he thought. "He's going to be okay." Over the next few days, Jake guided Shadow through tentative steps in the backyard, where snowdrifts had receded into muddy patches dotted with early crocuses. Each breath they shared was warm against the crisp spring air, and at Jake's light command, "Walk on, warrior," Shadow lifted his head and obeyed, muscles trembling but determined. They moved in perfect harmony, Jake's boots crunching on thawing earth, Shadow's paws clicking like soft stones. When Shadow faltered, Jake placed a steady hand at his shoulder and whispered, "You're not alone," infusing the words with every ounce of his resolve. At night, he'd sit beside Shadow's crate, reading aloud from a tattered novel about desert explorers, letting the dog's gentle snores weave a lullaby that reminded Jake healing could come in small moments. One afternoon, Jake loaded Shadow into the truck and drove to the edge of town, where a fenced field waited. Running free, Shadow erupted in slow-motion joy, chest broad and tail high as he chased a tough ball through tall grass. The sun warmed his back, and Jake watched tears gather as he realized Shadow had reclaimed the spark he'd almost lost. Neighbors paused on porches, smiling at the unlikely sight, a man and his dog, both survivors of darkness, striding together towards something brighter. As Shadow bounded back, eyes shining, Jake held out his hand for the ball and felt, for the first time since Max's passing, a sense of peace stirring in his bones. This was the start of their new chapter, one written in trust and second chances. That evening, with Shadow curled at his feet and the hearth crackling softly, Jake leaned back and closed his eyes. Outside, the last bird sang before dusk, and a gentle breeze stirred the curtains. He imagined Max's spirit walking beside him, proud and free, and he whispered, "We did it, buddy." Shadow lifted his head, met Jake's gaze, and gave a low, contented sigh. The room hummed with quiet promise. They had both found a home, and whatever tomorrow brought, they would face it together.